Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a stage. The lights burn down on your face. The crowd, 1,000 faces deep, waits in absolute silence. You tell yourself to breathe, to relax, to remember the words you've rehearsed 100 times in front of the mirror. But your hands tremble, your throat closes, and suddenly the harder you try to remember your speech, the more your mind offers you nothing, blankness. It's as if your effort has backfired, like some cruel trap inside. You was triggered by your very desire to succeed, and in that moment, you're paralyzed. Not because you didn't prepare, not because you're incapable, but because you tried too hard. Now zoom out. You're not on a stage anymore. You're in your life. And the stage? It's every situation where you've reached desperately for control, over anxiety, over love, over creativity, over your identity. And again, the harder you pushed, the more everything slipped from your grasp. Why does this happen? Why does the obsessive pursuit of peace lead to panic? Why does trying to fall asleep keep us awake? Why does chasing happiness often deepen our despair? Why do we lose authenticity in the act of trying to be our best selves? And most haunting of all, why does the very act of trying to become whole so often make us feel more fractured? You might call it irony, maybe even self-sabotage, but those are labels, easy names for something deeper, darker, and more universal. Beneath this paradox lies a force that governs not just psychology, but existence itself, a hidden contradiction so old and so persistent. It's embedded in the fabric of consciousness. Carl Jung hinted at this when he wrote, "We must be able to let things happen in the psyche. But how can we possibly let go when everything around us, our culture, our upbringing, even our deepest fears, screams that letting go is weakness? You've been taught that control is strength, that effort is virtue, that mastery comes from discipline, and salvation from self-improvement. But what if that belief is the very prison that keeps you stuck? What if the unconscious, the vast shadow realm within you, rebels against your conscious efforts, precisely because they come from a place of fear? You try to be good but feel secretly false. You try to love but it feels performative. You try to meditate but your mind races louder. You try to be yourself and end up further from who you are. Could it be that your striving is the problem? Not because you don't want change, but because the part of you that's striving is disconnected from the truth of who you really are. Think about the last time you tried to impress someone. Romantically, socially, professionally, you rehearsed your words, managed your expressions, sculpted your persona like clay. But deep down, did you feel real? Or did it feel like a mask? One that you hoped would win affection, but secretly feared would only prove how unlovable the real you might be. This is the silent war within, the struggle between the image and the essence, between the self you show and the self that watches from behind the eyes. And the harder you try to force unity between the two, the more painfully you feel the divide. So what's going on here? Why does your effort so often betray you? Why does your conscious mind, with all its discipline and intent, fail to convince the deeper layers of your being? And what is this force, this buried intelligence that seems to watch your striving with quiet resistance, refusing to bend, refusing to be tamed? You feel it in the background of every obsession. You feel it in the hollowness that follows every high. You feel it in the still, small voice that whispers, "This isn't it." You may call it your shadow, your unconscious, your soul, whatever name you give it. Its message is the same. You cannot will your way to wholeness. So what happens when you finally listen? When you stop running, stop fixing, stop performing? When you allow the hidden parts of you to speak? What might you find in that silence? This is not a path for the faint-hearted. It's not about passivity or giving up. It's about surrendering the illusion of control, so that something deeper can rise. And that's where we must go next, into the roots of this inner conflict, and the ancient wisdom that explains why your struggle to be better often brings out your worst. You were never taught to listen to the unconscious. You were taught to dominate it. From childhood, you were rewarded not for being whole, but for being good. Sit still. Smile. Say thank you. Don't cry. You learned early that some parts of you were acceptable, others shameful. You began to split. What pleased others was polished and presented. What threatened approval was buried beneath the surface. But what gets buried doesn't disappear. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious repository of all the aspects of yourself you were told not to be. It contains your rage, your jealousy, your sexuality, your creativity, your vulnerability. Not because these things are inherently bad, but because society could not handle their truth. The harder you tried to become a better person by suppressing these parts, the more your shadow grew. And here's the paradox. The more fragmented your inner world became, the more you had to control it. So you tried harder, but Jung warned us, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. This is the hidden trap. Your effort to improve, to be calm, kind, successful, spiritual is noble in intention, but disastrous when built on the foundation of denial. The unconscious does not respond to force. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a truth to be integrated. Enter Friedrich Nietzsche, who once said, "He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises." In other words, even self-loathing is a form of control, a way to maintain dominance over the aspects of yourself that threaten your constructed identity. And that identity? It's a carefully managed facade. It performs strength while hiding weakness. It speaks virtue while silencing desire. It acts free while obeying 1,000 unseen rules. But deep down, it is brittle, always afraid of cracking, of being seen. Now imagine living like this for decades, not in the open battlefield of war or trauma, but in the quiet trenches of everyday life. At your job, you smile while dying inside. In relationships, you please while secretly resenting. You meditate, journal, do yoga, all to fix yourself, but somehow end up more anxious, not less. Why? Because the very framework you operate from is flawed. You've built your house on sand. Aldous Huxley saw this clearly. In The Perennial Philosophy, he wrote that most suffering comes not from pain itself, but from the way we resist and interpret that pain. The ego, terrified of dissolution, clings to images of self-worth, perfection, and control. But the soul? The soul wants wholeness, not perfection. It wants truth, not performance. This conflict is why your efforts fail. Trying to meditate your way out of anxiety while suppressing your rage doesn't bring peace. It fragments you further. Trying to love while hating your own vulnerability doesn't deepen intimacy. It breeds self-abandonment. Trying to succeed while denying your fear doesn't empower. It exhausts. You become like a man furiously rowing against the current of his own being, wondering why he never reaches shore. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer would nod in grim agreement. He saw the human will not as a noble striving, but as a blind, restless force. one that traps us in a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. The more we want, the more we suffer. The more we strive, the more we hunger. Satisfaction is fleeting, and peace exists only in moments where the will is stilled. But how do you still the will in a world obsessed with performance? How do you listen to your inner truth in a society addicted to masks? Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But the modern self has become a performance, a brand, a curated collage of productivity, wellness, and false positivity. We are told to manifest our best lives while denying our worst fears. We post smiling photos while spiraling into depression. We speak of being authentic while filtering every word. Is it any wonder we're exhausted? Is it any wonder that our most intense efforts to heal, to become happy, balanced, successful, often deepen our wounds? Because healing isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming real. Carl Jung understood this. He believed the path to wholeness wasn't linear. It wasn't about transcendence, but descent into the shadow, into the unconscious, into the very parts of ourselves we fear the most. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, not just the parts that get applause, but the messy parts, the scared parts, the angry, needy, envious, confused, grieving parts, the child in you still locked in a room of unmet needs, the adolescent screaming to be seen, the adult pretending not to feel." Integration begins not with effort, but with permission. Permission to stop performing, to stop trying so hard, to stop identifying so completely with the ego that seeks to fix everything without understanding anything. Because what if the thing you are trying to escape, your sadness, your emptiness, your restlessness, is not a defect, but a doorway? What if it's a signal? Not that you are broken, but that your current way of being cannot contain your truth. This is not a call to complacency. It is a call to depth, a call to stop running from yourself, to stop spiritualizing your wounds, intellectualizing your shame, optimizing your dysfunction, to stop turning your life into a project, because beneath all the trying, beneath all the masks, a deeper self waits. One that does not want perfection, it wants integration. And that's where we're going next, into the subtle, invisible consequences of this division, into the everyday ways this fracture distorts our reality, sabotages our potential, and drains the vitality from our lives without us ever realizing it. The shadow doesn't destroy you. It waits for you. Will you face it? You wake up tired. Not just in your body, but in your being. You go through the motions, coffee, phone, smile, deadlines, noise. Somewhere beneath it all, there's a pressure, tight, quiet, gnawing. You can't name it, but it's always there. A vague discomfort, like your skin doesn't quite fit. Like you're playing a role in a play that no longer makes sense. You tell yourself it's just stress, just modern life. But what if it's something deeper? What if it's the cost of constantly trying to be someone you're not? This is the unseen consequence, disconnection, not just from others, but from your own truth. And it happens slowly, silently, like a fog thickening over time. You stop noticing the difference between your voice and the voices that were planted in you by parents, teachers, algorithms. You chase goals that once excited you but now feel hollow. You smile at friends and wonder if they really know you. If you really know you, this erosion doesn't show up in dramatic breakdowns. It shows up in numbness, in quiet self-betrayals, in the way you ignore your intuition because it doesn't align with your to-do list, in the way you tense up when you hear the word relax, because relaxing would mean letting go. And letting go would mean losing control, the very thing your mind has clung to for survival. But here's the truth. You were never in control to begin with. Modern psychology confirms what ancient mystics intuited. Most of your thoughts, actions, and emotions arise from processes outside your conscious awareness. Studies in neuroscience reveal that decisions are often made in the brain, before you're even aware of them. Free will exists, but not where you think. Your conscious mind is not the captain of the ship. It's more like the narrator, telling stories to make sense of a journey it doesn't fully understand. And yet we build our entire lives on this illusion of control. This is the great myth of our culture, that effort equals outcome. That self-improvement is a linear path to happiness. That if we just work harder on our careers, our diets, our relationships, our minds, we will finally arrive. But what if the map you're using was designed to keep you lost? What if the striving itself is a distraction? A brilliant, socially endorsed way to avoid the terror of simply being? Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And we do. We optimize our morning routines. We biohack our nervous systems. We chase peak performance like it's salvation, all while ignoring the wounded child inside us screaming to be held, not fixed. This isn't productivity. It's self-abandonment, and society rewards it. In a culture driven by consumerism, your feelings of inadequacy are not a glitch. They're the fuel. You are constantly told you're not enough, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not happy enough. And here's the kicker. The more you try to become enough, the more industries profit. The wellness industry thrives on your brokenness. Social media monetizes your insecurity. Self-help gurus grow rich off your belief that you need to be saved. But the truth is, you don't need fixing. You need remembering, reconnection, integration. And until you begin that inner work, your external life will always feel like a performance, a game, a treadmill you can't step off of, because you've been trained to equate stillness with failure. But stillness is where the unconscious speaks. It's where creativity lives, not the manic, performative kind, but the raw kind that emerges from silence. That painting you never started. That book you can't seem to finish. That truth you're afraid to say out loud. These aren't blocked by laziness. They're blocked by self-alienation. Because you're trying to create from the ego, from the part of you obsessed with outcomes, approval, and applause. But the soul doesn't care about applause. It cares about expression. And expression cannot be forced. It arises when you stop trying to control the river and finally learn to float. This same law applies to love, to sex, to healing, to joy. Think about it. The best moments of your life, were they planned? Were they the result of effort? Or did they arrive uninvited, unfolding effortlessly? Like a breeze through an open window? You weren't trying to feel joy. You forgot to try. And in that forgetting, you return to something real. So why don't we live that way more often? Because we're terrified of surrender. We're addicted to striving. Our nervous systems are wired for threat, constantly scanning for danger. And in that hypervigilance, we mistake effort for safety. But it's not safety, it's bondage. And the cost is immense. You start to lose your ability to play, to rest, to simply exist. You become chronically fatigued even if your body is rested. You smile less. Your breath becomes shallow. You feel detached from nature, from music, from wonder. You begin to suspect something is missing, but can't name what. So you try harder. You download another app, take another course, read another book. But the more you consume, the more starved you feel. This is the soul's hunger, and it cannot be fed by striving, only by surrender, only by listening to the deeper currents of your being, the parts that don't speak in words, but in symbols, sensations, and dreams. Jung called this the language of the unconscious, and it is always speaking. But are you listening? Or are you too busy trying to improve yourself into oblivion? This is not a small problem. It is an existential crisis hiding in plain sight, a pandemic of performance masquerading as progress, a silent epidemic of self-rejection so normalized we barely recognize it. But here's the good news. Cracks always appear before transformation. The dissonance you feel? It's a doorway. The exhaustion, a signal. The breakdown, a portal. And there is a way through, not by force, not by fixing, but by rebellion, by turning away from the path of striving and towards something radically different, something terrifying, something sacred. And that's what comes next. Because now that you've seen the cost of this inner division, the only question left is, will you break down or break free? Let's begin the rebellion. What if freedom doesn't begin with action, but with refusal? Not the kind of loud, performative rebellion that gets plastered across social media feeds or branded into slogans, but something quieter, deeper. A rebellion that begins in the soul, a refusal to continue playing the game. Imagine this: you stop trying. You stop trying to be better, to be loved, to be productive, to be happy. You sit, you breathe, you listen, and in that terrifying stillness, you begin to hear something you've never truly heard before. Yourself. This is where the rebellion begins. Not in external revolution, but in inner reclamation. You don't need more effort. You need the courage to unbecome everything you were never meant to be. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the slow, painful, liberating unfolding of the true self beneath the constructed persona. It is not the journey of becoming someone new. It is the shedding of illusions, masks, and inherited scripts to finally become who you are, and always were. But here's the paradox. You cannot force individuation. You cannot schedule it into your Google Calendar. It unfolds organically when you stop trying to control it. So how do you rebel against the trap of striving? You begin by making peace with paradox. You realize that surrender is not weakness. It is strength. That softness is not the opposite of power. It is its deepest expression. That discipline is not about force. It's about devotion to truth. The philosopher Alan Watts once described the trap of trying to control the mind with the mind. It's like trying to bite your own teeth. The very tool we use to fix ourselves, the ego, is the same tool that created the illusion of brokenness. So what happens if you drop the tool? What happens if you stop fixing and start feeling? This is where ancient wisdom becomes essential. The Tao Te Ching speaks of Wu Wei, effortless action, flowing with the nature of things rather than against them. Not because you're lazy, but because you've aligned with something deeper than thought. The rhythm of being itself. You become like water, fluid, receptive, unstoppable. This is not passive resignation. It is active surrender, a conscious choice to move from force to flow, from resistance to responsiveness. And once you step into this current, something strange begins to happen. Your life starts working, not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally aligned. You say no to things that drain you without guilt. You speak truth that once terrified you. You create not for approval, but from necessity. You begin to feel joy, not because you earned it, but because you stopped blocking it. This rebellion rewires everything. Your nervous system, long addicted to the high of productivity and the safety of control, begins to recalibrate. Your breath slows. Your thoughts soften. Your body starts to feel like home again. And you realize, often with tears, that this version of you, the one who isn't trying, is the most authentic you've ever met, the self underneath the striving. But make no mistake, this path is not without pain. Because when you stop striving, the truth that's been buried under years of noise rises like smoke. The grief, the rage, the neglected dreams, the uncomfortable truths about who you've become. You will be tempted to run, to distract, to try again. But don't sit in the fire, because this is where rebirth begins, not through achievement, but through honest presence. This is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You don't ascend by avoiding your shadow. You transcend by embracing it. Let it speak. Let the part of you that's been silenced scream. Let the inner child cry. Let the forgotten artist paint in wild, unstructured colors. Let the soul dance without rhythm or purpose. This is your rebellion. And the most revolutionary act in a world obsessed with trying is to be as you are. To eat slowly. To love messily, to cry loudly, to rest when you're tired, to speak when your throat trembles, to stop numbing your discomfort and start honoring it as sacred data from the soul. This rebellion doesn't look like much from the outside. There are no badges, no certificates, no 10-step programs, but its impact is seismic, because the moment you stop trying to be someone, you become something far more dangerous. You become alive, and aliveness is contagious. It ripples outward. Your presence starts to change the room, not because you're performing, but because you're real. People feel it. They soften around you. They begin to question their own masks. You become a mirror, reflecting what is possible when someone chooses truth over image, depth over perfection, presence over performance. And from that place, paradoxically, you begin to achieve things that once felt impossible. Not because you pushed harder, but because you got out of your own way. This is the irony of all transformation. The less you try to force it, the more naturally it unfolds. You begin to live not from discipline, but from devotion. Not from urgency, but from embodiment. You begin to trust that who you are at your core is enough. And that enoughness? It doesn't make you lazy. It makes you free. This is the essence of true rebellion. Not escape, not avoidance, not another performance masked as healing, but a return to soul, to silence, to wholeness. And once you've tasted this kind of freedom, you can never go back. You see the world differently. You see yourself differently. You stop looking for answers in systems designed to keep you small. You begin asking deeper questions. Not, how can I fix myself? But, what am I finally ready to feel? Not, how can I succeed? But, what truth wants to be spoken through me? Not, how can I be more? But, what can I let go of? Because on the other side of striving isn't emptiness. It's space. Space to listen, to create, to live. And in that space, the ultimate truth begins to whisper. Ready to hear it? Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, dark forest. Behind you lies everything you've ever known. The striving, the masks, the stories you inherited. Ahead is only silence. Dense, uncertain, alive. There is no path, no guide. Just the weight of a question that won't go away. Who am I without the struggle? You step forward, not because you're ready, but because something deeper has awakened, and it refuses to go back to sleep. This is the final descent, not into despair, but into truth. And here, At the bottom of all the trying, you find what you were never taught to look for. You find that you were never broken, not for a second, not even in your most self-destructive moments. The parts of you that made bad choices, that sabotaged relationships, that numbed pain with distraction, those were not flaws. They were adaptations, clever ancient mechanisms built to protect your most tender essence. Carl Jung called these unconscious patterns complexes, constellations of emotion, memory and defense born from trauma and neglect. And the goal was never to destroy them. It was to integrate them, to make them conscious. You don't transcend your pain by denying it. You transcend it by walking into it with open eyes, by loving the very parts of yourself you were taught to hide. The deeper truth? The harder you try, the more you resist who you already are. Trying, in the compulsive egoic sense, is an act of war against the present moment. It says, this is not enough. I am not enough. Life is not enough. And that lie is the source of almost every form of suffering. You were born whole, but you were taught to forget, taught to chase external markers of value instead of cultivating inner worth. Taught to suppress emotions that made others uncomfortable. Taught that love must be earned, not remembered. So the mind began its campaign of self-improvement, of image management, of spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity. Anything to avoid the terrifying possibility that this moment, raw and unpolished, might actually be sacred. But here's the final paradox, the kind that shatters illusions. You don't become free by achieving anything. You become free by surrendering everything. You let go, not just of the need to try, but of the identity that tries, the you that always needs to prove. Please protect, perform. That's not you. It's a construct, a bundle of stories stitched together by fear and shaped by culture. And when you drop it, even for a moment, something miraculous happens. Silence. Not emptiness, not numbness, but the kind of silence that hums with presence, the kind that holds everything, the grief and the joy, the shadow and the light, in perfect balance. This is the self that Jung spoke of, the archetypal core of your being, the axis around which your psyche orbits. It does not strive, it does not seek approval, it simply is. And in that being, you rediscover something the world tried to make you forget. You are not here to succeed. You are here to wake up from the dream of separation, the myth of inadequacy, the fantasy of perfection, to remember that life is not a project, it's a presence, not a task to master, but a mystery to participate in. And when you truly see this, not just intellectually but in your bones, something ancient stirs inside you, a memory of a time before the conditioning, before the shame, before the endless trying, a time when your breath was enough, when your laugh was spontaneous, when your creativity had no agenda, when your being was not measured, monetized, or manipulated, but celebrated. You remember yourself, not the self that's curated online, not the one that smiles on command, but the wild, tender, vast being underneath it all. The one who can cry without explanation, love without strategy, exist without apology. And this remembrance, it changes everything. You stop asking, am I doing it right? You start asking, am I being honest? You stop performing healing. You start embodying truth. And truth, once touched, becomes your compass. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes it real. Your relationships deepen, your work aligns, your voice becomes sharper, not louder, but clearer. You begin to move not from fear, but from resonance. You become less reactive, less easily seduced by the noise, more grounded, more whole, and perhaps most importantly, you learn to hold paradox. You learn that joy and grief can dance in the same breath, That success can be beautiful but never define your worth. That surrender isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of something truer. Because here is the ultimate truth. The more you resist life, the heavier it becomes. The more you allow it, the more it reveals you. Trying is rooted in resistance. Surrender is rooted in trust. And trust, radical trust, is the deepest rebellion of all. Trust that your pain has meaning, that your wounds are gates, that your intuition is wiser than any algorithm, that your being, messy, raw, sacred, is not a problem to solve but a miracle to embody. This is not a truth you arrive at. It's a truth you remember, a truth that lives in your body, in the space between breaths, in the moments of stillness when you're not trying to be anything, just breathing, listening, being. So let this be your invitation to stop, to soften, to remember, not someday, not after the next goal, but now, because now is all you've ever had. And in this moment, without effort, without performance, without pretense, you are already free. You've always been. And now finally you remember.